So this video will help you understand the changing Constitution. One of the questions that you're asked for this course to consider is, does the U.S. Constitution change? That's a big question, and by the time we're done watching and thinking about this video, you'll know the answer. Also, another question that you're asked is our Constitution a living document? They seem like about the same question, but they're really not, and we're going to talk about that in this video as well. Looking at this slide, you probably are reminded of your trip to Washington, D.C. in 8th grade when you could go to the National Archives, and maybe you've seen the Constitution. There's guards, not usually military guards. This picture must be something special. Typically, it's just hired police or national or Washington, D.C. police officers that are guarding it. So let's talk about this Constitution. It is a handwritten document. And it is basically, if we had to summarize what it is our rule book for our country. Now, a lot of Americans will probably think, oh, the Constitution, that's the same as the Declaration of Independence. Just because they're both founding documents and they're old, crusty yellow pieces of paper, they're not the same thing, right? The Declaration of Independence was 1776 and primarily written by Thomas Jefferson. By the time we get to writing the Constitution, it's 1787, so 11 years later. Thomas Jefferson's not even in the United States. He's in France. This document is written by 55 or 56 men, depending on the day, and 39 men would sign it at the end. And this tells us that we will have a president and a vice president. We'll have a Congress. All of that is laid out in the Constitution. Right? It was written by men like George Washington, Ben Franklin, Alexander Hamilton, James Madison. These are the men involved in writing this Constitution. So if you look in the upper left, you'll see the words, "We the people." That tells us that this document and this whole government that we're creating gets its power from the people, not from a king, not from any other source other than just the citizens of this country. They pick their leaders. They let people be their leaders for a short time. It goes on to say, "We the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union." All right, so that's really important for a couple reasons. The first one is they realized this document wasn't perfect. It was written by men, and no man is perfect, so therefore no creation of man would be perfect. Secondly, it's telling us that we're now in a union. Remember, the states had been together in kind of a league of friendship under the Articles of Confederation. It was very casual. They weren't really connected to each other. Now, this new government, under the Constitution, the states would be in a union. That means something. That means that these states are married to each other. It's a marriage, which is a union. It's weird to think about, but I think it's helpful. So remember, Georgia, under this document, is now married to New Hampshire. Georgia and New Hampshire have very little in common, right? Georgia being a slave state, New Hampshire did away with slavery. New Hampshire is fishing and shipping, and Georgia is not. They don't have a lot in common, but now they're going to be married to each other. And when they get married, they bring all of their good and bad qualities. State debt and the issue of slavery now is on the table, and it's part of the marriage. And New Hampshire has to figure out a way to survive and to be married and to thrive being married to Georgia. And you could do that for all of the states. And we'll talk more about that a little bit later. But this preamble, this introductory paragraph, tells us what this document is all about. Then as we move through the document, we see that it's broken up into big chunks. Each chunk is called an article. So another way of thinking of it would be like a chapter. So Article 1 is a big chunk at the very beginning of the Constitution. And in Article 1, we find the rules for Congress. It says there shall be a Congress, which will have a House of Representatives and a Senate. It tells us how each of those get members elected, how long they are elected for, what's the election process, what's the powers of the Congress once you're in Congress, what's the powers of the House of Representatives, what's the power of the Senate, what powers do they have together. That's all in Article 1. So later in this course, when we start studying Congress, all of that information is coming from the Constitution. Article 2 is about the president and vice president, the executive branch. So the fact that we'll have a president, he'll serve or she'll serve for this long, the powers that they have, the duties, responsibilities, all of that is in Article 2. Article 3 deals with the Supreme Court and the federal courts. How do we get our courts? Who's on the courts? How many people are on the courts? What is the power of the courts? How long are they there? All of that is in Article 3. But remember, the purpose of this talk is primarily how do we change it? Yes, the Constitution is a changing document. They were smart enough to know that this document, this government rule book, would need to be changed from time to time. So when we get to Article 5, it is all about amending the Constitution or changing it. So an amendment is a change by adding something. Typically, we put it on the end, right? So if we looked in the original Constitution, they might mention slavery. Remember, slavery was actually part of the Constitution. For every 5 slaves, they would equal 3 people when counting for the House of Representatives. That's in the original document. But the 13th Amendment does away with slavery. So we add that to the end. We might put a tiny line through the Constitution part, or the part of the Constitution that deals with slavery, so that we see that it's been changed. All right? So an amendment is a change by adding something. Nowhere in the Constitution does it say that women can vote, but we add an amendment to the end of it to tell us that women can vote. So all of the amendments that you'll be learning are added to the end, and those amendments kind of changed the original. So if we look at this slide, we see the breakdown of how the Constitution is put together: the Preamble, Article 1, Congress, Article 2, the President, Article 3, Supreme Court, and all the federal courts. But we get to Article 5, it's all about amending the Constitution. Right? So they gave us a system. They wrote into the Constitution a plan to change it. All right, so let's look at that plan. This chart maybe is helpful as well. There's several ways it can be done, as mentioned in Article 5 of the Constitution. You can change it by first proposing a change in the Congress, or you could have it proposed by all the states, but typically, most often, 99% of the time, is be done with this way, using this chart with the ways that are highlighted with the red stars. For example, most amendments, the vast majority of the 27 times that we've changed it, have come by Congress doing it first. So you get 2/3 of the House of Representatives to agree to it. So let's just say women voting, you needed 2/3 of the House of Representatives to agree to that they would allow women to vote. You needed 2/3 of the Senate to vote on it. That would be about 67 senators you needed today, but back then there wouldn't have been 100 senators when they did that in 1919. So it would have been 2/3 of the number of senators then. And if it passes the House and the Senate by 2/3, then it's off to the state government. And you need to get 3/4 of all the states to agree to it. So you would take it to the state government in Ohio, for example. You go to Columbus, and the state government in Columbus would vote on this. You take it to the state government in California, in Sacramento, and the state government in Sacramento would vote on it. The state government in Santa Fe of New Mexico, they would vote on it. And you do that for all of the states. But once you've got 3/4 of the state governments to agree to something, to agree to this change, then it becomes a change in the Constitution. So you need 2/3 of both the House and the Senate, and that's not easy to do. Then you need to get 3/4 of all the state governments to agree to it, and that is also very difficult to do. In fact, there's been thousands and thousands of proposed amendments, but we only have 27 changes to the Constitution. Now, we also talked about how, and hopefully you've looked over other things in this module and other modules about the Federalist and the Anti-Federalist. So when this Constitution was written, There were those who believed we needed this government document, this new rule book that would create a very strong government. Those people were called the Federalists. Men like Alexander Hamilton, John Jay, James Madison, they pushed for the new Constitution. But there were others who were very scared of a strong government, and you can probably understand why, right? We had just fought the British, the king, the parliament. They had a very strong government. The colonists felt like they were being trampled upon, and they didn't have a lot of freedoms. They didn't have the right to say whatever they wanted. They didn't have the right to write whatever they wanted in the newspaper. Oftentimes their guns were taken by the British redcoats. Oftentimes the redcoats would live in their house without their permission. Sometimes they'd be thrown in jail without a trial, or they might be even tortured. So they wanted a list of amendments that would protect their rights, or they would never agree to vote for the new Constitution. So the deal was the Constitution would get passed, but they would immediately add a list of amendments or protections for Americans. So the first 10 amendments, these changes that come together, kind of bundled together, are all about protecting the rights of citizens, giving citizens certain liberties. And we'll go into depth on all of these a little bit later in other lecture videos. But you've heard of these, of course, right? The freedom of speech and press, the freedom of religion. You have to have a search warrant to come into my house. You can't punish me cruelly. All of these are listed in the first 10 changes that were added immediately to the Constitution. This is what the Anti-Federalists pushed for. They wanted a list of things that the government can't do and that citizens can do. So the government can't take away your guns. Citizens can have church however they want, within reason. All of these are listed in the first 10 amendments. Right? We'll go over them later in another video, but I just wanted to show you that the first 10 amendments we would call the Bill of Rights. But you've heard me say a few slides ago that there actually have been 27 changes to our Constitution. So the first 10 are the Bill of Rights, but the others that come after it deal with a variety of things. Ending slavery, making sure that people are treated equally regardless of their color or race, giving African American men the right to vote, giving all women the right to vote, making alcohol illegal, making it legal again, giving 21-year-olds the right to have alcohol, and voting at 18. All of these things are listed in these 27 amendments that would be attached to the Constitution. So our beginning question was, does the Constitution change? The answer is yes. We've changed it 27 times. It's a very difficult process. You need to get the House of Representatives and the Senate to agree, 2/3 of each. Then you have to get 3/4 of the states. That's hard to do. But it is possible to change the Constitution. The other question is it a living Constitution? Well, that's a little bit different type of question. That kind of question deals with how you read and interpret the Constitution. So basically today there are two ways to do it. Two ways that judges, members of the Supreme Court, and others look at our Constitution. They can either look at it and say, I'm reading the text exactly how it's written. What did this text mean to the people who wrote it and to the people who voted on it back in the 1780s? It means what it means. The other way of doing it is, the other way of interpreting the Constitution is saying, well, this is a living document. You have to read between the lines a little bit. You have to stretch it to apply to an ever-changing society. And that approach is different from the very much looking at the text as it's written. I'm not saying either one is right or wrong. It's just two different ways of looking at the same document. And when you look at our Supreme Court, it's kind of a mixture. Some of the justices really see the Constitution as evolving and a living document. Some see it as, this is the way we read it, this is the way it was, and we're going to make it work with our society today. Very much literal, and what does the text say? So that's a different question. Does the Constitution change? Yes. Is it a living Constitution? That's up for you to decide.